morning. My name is Ineke Pruin. I'm assistant professor at the University of Bern, and I have today at the ESC conference in Münster the honor and the pleasure to interview Professor Dr. Frida Dünkel from the University of Greifswald, who is the current president of the European Society of Criminology. Frida, how did you become a criminologist? What was your original motivation, and how was the way into criminology?
Well, I'm a lawyer. I have studied law in Heidelberg and in Freiburg in the south of Germany. And I also studied psychology and had, during my studies, interest in deviance and other problems which are related to criminology. I graduated in Freiburg in 1974, and I started after my law career, if you want, a law education career. I started to work at the Max Planck Institute of International and Foreign Penal Law, together with Günther Kaiser, who was the director at that time at the Max Planck Institute. And I finished my PhD thesis, which was on the effectiveness of treatment in so-called social therapeutic units in prisons. I finished this in 1979, and then was for a long period a senior researcher at the Max Planck Institute doing empirical projects, in particular on prisons and juvenile justice and so on. And had my habilitation thesis in 1989. It was just the time of the break of the wall in Germany and the reunification between East and West Germany. So my first academic post after this habilitation was here in Münster for one semester. I was having a semester for replacing Hans-Joachim Schneider. And I got then the post in Greifswald. Greifswald is close to the, at the Baltic Sea in the northeast of Germany, in the former GDR. So it was the task to establish or re-establish a university, a law faculty in the east of Germany. Under the communist regime in the past GDR, they had closed down almost all law faculties, and so I arrived in 1992 with nothing. We had no books, we had nothing, and so we had to establish a whole faculty and the Department of Criminology. I was lucky to have a professorship for just criminology. I did some penal law also, but my main task was teaching criminology, juvenile justice, penology, and so on. But and so from 1992 until 2015, I was a professor of criminology. Now I'm an emeritus since 1 year, and having done a lot of research and a lot of teaching in the field of criminology and criminal justice. Yeah, so far to my curriculum vitae, if you want. Maybe we can go on with talking about what was the main tasks when I arrived in Greifswald. I continued somehow the international relationships I had established already at the Max Planck Institute. The Max Planck Institute is one of the most famous places in Europe for criminology and penal law. And at a given day there were almost 30, 40 foreigners. And at that time, there were young PhD students from all over Europe and the world, if you want. And I made friendship with a lot of them, in particular Italian, Spanish, and Eastern European young researchers. And we all grew up, and they all got professors, and as me, and so we had a network already. And I started with a network in 1989, still being in Freiburg, on prison research. It was in 1988 when we thought that the interest in criminology and criminal justice research was shifting from prisons to alternative sanctions, and nobody was interested anymore in prisons and critical prison research. And therefore I collected a group of researchers doing, the aim was they must be independent from any government and official administrations in prisons. And we collected data and research on prison systems in the world. One of the my first books edited together with Dirk van Zijl-Smit was Imprisonment Today and Tomorrow in 1999, the result of this, one of the first conferences we organized around Freiburg. And coming to Greifswald, I just took up these international friendships and continued networking in this field. A second pillar of my main research interests is juvenile justice. I had done my habilitation thesis on juvenile imprisonment in Europe, always in a comparative view. I'm very much interested in international comparative research and combining that with these young researchers at that time all over Europe. And living in Greifswald geographically means you are in the middle between St. Petersburg and Porto. So you are in a bridge, you could be a bridge between East and West. This was my main interest, to bring Eastern European scholars to Western Europe and to bring them together. Already before the wall break in the end of the 80s, I had good contacts to Russian, to Polish, in particular Polish scholars and others in Eastern Europe. And after the 1989-1990 events, it was much easier naturally. And I established then networks, cooperations, in particular with Russia. I had 17 years long, from 1993 until 2010, cooperations with Siberian law faculties, a whole bunch of Irkutsk and Tomsk and Krasnoyarsk and other cities, and in order to reform law education in these Far East Russian universities. And I learned a lot about the situation there, and today one of the achievements maybe is that now young scholars from Russia and from Eastern Europe are coming up and having a different scientific level than before the break of the war. Okay.
So I think also I see that it is a great achievement of you that you bring together all these scholars and all these criminologists from other countries, especially from the Eastern European countries, in your large networks. So, but if you go back to the first days of your career, how did it come especially that you were so interested in prisons? Did you have any practical experience? Or?
I was not in prison, but indeed, yes. One of the motivations was that as a student I was going to prisons and doing counseling with prisoners. And one of the personal developments was that I'm a late 68 student. One thing was that we founded a community. We lived together, not only with my at that time girlfriend, but also with others, and some of them were prisoners, ex-prisoners. And so I saw, so my personal experience was that these people have about the same aspirations, the same thinking about good life. Today we say the good life approach, and I saw these are quite normal people and with the same ideas of life, and it's just by accident that I'm not behind the walls, and they have had this experience of prison. So I was personally motivated to change life in prison and to improve the situation in prisons. You must imagine in the late 60s, in the beginning 70s, it was before the big law reform on prisons in Germany, and at that time I fought for a better legislation. And I saw that I could really have some or fight effectively for better legislation. I'm a lawyer and I'm involved very much in crime or penal policy, crime policy, and I do that with great interest to counsel legislators. I have been in so many federal parliaments in Germany when the legislation in the last 10 years was going on, when the competences for prison laws were given to the federal states. So we have 16 federal states in Germany, and all have a new prison legislation, and I was in almost every parliament and was invited as an expert. I'm independent. I'm not a member of any political party, but and that's why I was asked by many parties and so on, so that the Social Democrats or the Christian Democrats or the left-wing parties also asked me. I never would go for a right-wing party. They never asked me that. But so I was seen being independent and just advising legislators on an evidence-based and human rights approach. And this is, has been sometimes effectively, sometimes not, because politicians and the politics are working otherwise than science people from an academic field are thinking. It's not always evidence-based and rational decision-making in the field of policy. So, so I have a personal background and experience of the field from my students' time, and I have also worked in several non-profit organizations for ex-prisoners. In Freiburg, I founded or co-founded an association for the resettlement of offenders. And I was 20 years, I was one of the presidents or vice presidents of this association. And so I had always a look on the practice, and I was not sitting in my university and just thinking. I had really practical experience with people who have been in prison or who were having problems with that. So, that was...
One of your achievements is also that you managed to influence the practice. If you, for example, look at the Constitutional Court in Germany.
Yeah, it was a time in Germany when we had no legislation at all for juvenile prisons, which is, from today's perspective, it's unbelievable that a developed country like Germany has not succeeded in enacting a prison legislation. And it was in 2006 then when the Federal Constitutional Court decided about this situation, and I was invited as an expert. And I think some of the very famous the parts of this very famous decision maybe had a background of what I have told them about what would be important for legislation. And it is one of the most meaningful and important decisions of the Federal Constitutional Court in Germany, because one phrase is that the further development of prisons must be evidence-based, and they really ask the prison administrations to introduce research and this was very important. And since that time now, in every federal state, we have departments of prison research, and so it's a really upcoming or furthering criminological research in this field, and this is, I think, a very good development. We always can say, okay, well, if you don't want to fund, why do you are obliged to do research? Please let our researchers in, and a lot of my PhD students have had chosen subjects of prisons, prison reform, and so on. Another motivation for my work was always that I was involved in human rights work, and I have been an expert in the Council of Europe for several years, since already in the 1990s, I think. But one of the most exciting experiences was that the Council of Europe asked 3 experts. There was Dirk van Zijl-Smit from now Nottingham University, it was Andrea Bechtold from Bern, Switzerland, and me to draft the European rules for juvenile offenders subject to sanctions or measures. And this drafting was between 2006 and 2008, and it was a really exciting experiment to have very intensive workshops together. We call these rules the Greifswald rules because we drafted most of them in Greifswald, my university city, and but it's not like the UN rules that the name is given by the city where they have been drafted, the Tokyo rules or the Beijing rules. But this is a joke. We took it as a joke. But the important thing was that really these recommendations have been. I think they are the most comprehensive recommendation of the Council of Europe in the field, and with good arguments for many details and detailed rules in juvenile imprisonment, and not only imprisonment, but all forms of deprivation of liberty for juveniles or young adults also, and also for community sanctions. It's a whole book of sanctions for juvenile offenders or young offenders, and in the following period there was quite a lot of I launched quite a lot of research about making standards work, how do they have impact in the national legislation of European countries, and this is my great interest. I have later done the same experience with restorative justice. Just in a year ago or 2 years ago, we have published a great compilation of national reports on what is the impact of international standards, human rights standards on restorative justice. And so this is one of my fields. I would describe my research interest is mainly the criminal justice system and how it works with community sanctions, with prisons, and doing this in a comparative way, and doing it on the one hand evidence-based, criminologically evidence-based sense, and also on the basis of humanitarian and of human rights issues. Mm-hmm. That's maybe a brief summary of what I'm interested in.
We have now already talked about your achievements to bring together theory and practice, to make practice evidence-based, and to bring together different people in one country, different people all over the world, and especially all over Europe. And what would you see as your challenges, the main challenges as a criminologist?
Yeah, well, okay. The problem in Germany, one has maybe to explain a bit the situation of criminology in Germany. criminology is attached to the law faculties, and that's why most criminologists have this legal background. Law faculties, in particular in Eastern Germany, in the former GDR, they have been established with a staff of about 14 or 15 professorships. So 6 are civil law, 5 are public law, and normally 3 are in penal law. And so there can be only one criminologist, because you have the whole penal law program. And the criminologist is in so many faculties is not a real empirical working person. It is just a textbook criminologist, a penal lawyer with some interest in juvenile law or prison law or in some criminological questions. And the challenge is how to develop research, empirical research. I've done empirical research in prisons and in other areas, but how to maintain this level of at least furthering empirical research in this country. And I think that criminology on these small size faculties has not a really good perspective. It's in danger to get lost. Students are very much interested, they like it. I have always had half of the students of Greifswald went to my criminal justice teaching, and that's why criminology is really loved by so many young people. And it was my aim to motivate young people for criminology. And I mean, one of the achievements may be that I have had 50 doctoral theses accompanied. I had 50 PhD theses in Greifswald, and so. But the challenge is really how to develop also longitudinal research. We did some research on juvenile delinquency and so, which was somehow longitudinal. But if you have always doctoral students of 2 or 3 years, and then they go to the practice, and you have no post in our university. I have had 2 or 3 associate researchers or young assistants. And a couple of 8, 10 doctoral students, but they change all the time. So you have no longitudinal. The longitudinal perspective can only be realized in bigger institutes like the Max Planck Institute or the Institute of Criminology in Lower Saxony and in Hanover, and that's really the challenge for Germany, also to develop maybe criminology in the sociological, social sciences and psychological departments of other faculties. And in the 70s and maybe 80s also, we had good sociological criminology, but now this has disappeared. In sociology you get a professorship only if you do general sociology and general psychology, clinical psychology and so on, and not if you are interested in deviance and in criminology. So this is a structural problem in Germany, I would say. One solution could be to network together, and that's what my successor now also does in Greifswald, to build research networks with bigger institutes, with other departments of criminology, and then you have the power to do real big projects and longitudinal projects also. Yeah, that's about the challenges of criminology.
And if you look at the broader landscape of criminology in Europe, what would you say, what would be your ideas and your opinions about criminology in Europe in general, and the differences between the European criminology and criminology in the United States?
Okay. Well, first remark would be European criminology differs from American criminology by this scientific background. We have, not only in Germany, criminology is attached to law faculties, also in Southern Europe or in Eastern Europe. The big exceptions are UK and the Netherlands. They have the most developed departments and research units in Europe, I would say. Also maybe Scandinavian, some Swedish, but I would feel it as one of the most important tasks for the future of criminology that we further develop criminology in the so-called developing countries for criminology, like in Eastern Europe and also in Southern Europe, and by networking, by doing international comparative research. And I have done a lot, and I've profited a lot from, for example, the EU funding, research funds. We have done quite a lot of projects, I think, on prisons, on juvenile justice, and on restorative justice was all funded by the European Union. So, and then the advantage is if you have a network, and then I had my friends are all over Europe, and we could easily establish a network of 20 or more researchers for such a project. And I think this was impressive also for the donators of research funds. Yes, okay, what was, the difference? Well, I mean, Michael Todry has done a very well statement about the differences between European and American criminology, and this is indeed the difference is that the European criminology is much more law-oriented and normative-oriented and based, and also human rights oriented, whereas the American criminology is really pure criminology, not thinking about legal backgrounds and human rights issues so much. And this is maybe one of the differences. I would see the advantage in both. We should have both. The criminologists should also think about, maybe law reforms and human rights issues, and the law criminology should think more on qualitative and quantitative research methods and how to improve their research. Indeed, the PhD thesis we can offer in our universities, they are very small scale, and the empirical level is rather modest. But okay, that's the situation we have in Germany. What was
that's what you would wish for the future development of criminology in Europe, in Germany and in Europe, that they could do more empirical research.
Clearly, there's always the problem of funding, and I would wish that also in Germany, for example, the federal states would more. They pay so much money for some project and programs, but they never evaluate prevention programs, for example. And there are a lot of law reforms which have never been evaluated, and penal law reforms, and I would wish that really what our constitutional court demands is evidence-based policy. This is not really the case, and so that would be one of the options, and this is everywhere. I think the European Society of Criminology could have a really important function, and it has already this function, to bring people together. We have more than 1,000 people in Münster here. We had even more in Porto last year, so it is expanding, and we see that we can attract young people. Also, it was the idea of the last president, Gerben Bruinsma, to have the young researchers in the middle of not only these old people like me, and this is our task, to attract young people, to give them a chance to make an academic career, to further them. I'm lucky to have 3 women, one of them is you, who have chosen this way for an academic career in criminology and criminal justice. And yeah, that's what I could do. I have, as I told, there are 50 doctoral students. Most of them went to the practice in prisons, practice as a prosecutor or judge. So they are transporting criminological knowledge into the practice, and this is very important, that normal lawyers have an idea of what is going on in prisons, what is going on in probation and so on, and how criminal careers develop, all the stuff on desistance and so on. It's very important to be a practitioner, a judge, to having knowledge about this. So and this is I think this is also one of the achievements maybe, that quite a lot of, when I go to some events in Germany, I always meet some former students and former PhD students, and they say, oh yes, it was a wonderful time in your department, and I have learned a lot for life.
So they do evidence-based policy because they bring the ideas from research to practice.
They are not always so influential, but I am not yet a Minister of Justice. But maybe so far. Possibly. And yeah. Okay.
And your role as the president of the European Society of Criminology?
Well, yeah, it's not very important. I mean, you are 1 year president, and our main task in the European Society is to organize these conferences, and maybe to attract and to motivate young people, young researchers, to come, and to we have awards, and we have some motivational things to attract people, but. I have not a special role. I think the most important things are to really have a good organization for these conferences, and this was not me, that was Klaus Börs and his team here in Münster. They have done a wonderful job, and so it really works good. And yeah, it's to meet old friends. It's now the 16th conference. I have attended all 16. I'm one of the few probably who have started was in Lausanne, or it was not in Switzerland, the first conference in 2001, and now. Yeah, and at that time there were 200, 300 and 400 people. Today we have more than 1,000 people coming for these conferences, and maybe even 1,500 in the next years. We have a journal, we have so it's really an important organization, I would say, in the meantime, and it's a very short period if you want. And so it was a wonderful idea of the founders of the European Society of Criminology to have our own event. I remember the times in the 1990s, we had to go to the United States for the American Society of Criminology meetings, in order to meet important people, and now the people are also coming from the United States to Europe, and this has improved, by the way, the relationships between American and European criminologists considerably. I'm happy about that development, and that Europe plays now also his role in the world in criminology.
You have now highlighted already at several points that the promotion of young researchers is very important for you, has been very important for you in your working life.
Yes.
That you see achievements in it.
I mean, I'm from my personality, I want to have many people around me. So I collected young people, and we have, it's not only to do research, to live together, to do having parties and having excursions and doing things together. And this is what I was happy that I always had about 10, 15 people around in my department, and to motivate them. And I have the experience that my daughter was also doing a PhD in a very different matter in history of arts, and I saw that she was sometimes feeling very alone, and her professor was a big number in the world. She has not so much direct guidance, if you want. And I saw that it is important to motivate young researchers. There is always a point where you say, oh, I never will finish, I have so much read and I cannot. And so you have to say, okay, take your time, but go on. And you will, finally you will be happy. And I have also always motivated for young people, my researchers, to go to the European Society meetings, to go to conferences, to give a paper. And after you have given your first paper, they grow, and oh, wow, wonderful. This is a wonderful feeling. And if you see how people develop, young people, in their personality, but also scientifically, that's wonderful. It's the best profession you can imagine. I'm really happy as being one of the academic scholars, having contributed a little bit to the further development of young people. That's wonderful.
And as your scholar, I might say that you are really good in motivating people and showing us that it's possible to bring together research and life and fun and contacts. Yeah? So I would say you stand for this in my eyes, in Germany and probably also in all over Europe. Yeah. So probably to close, the last question, what would you wish for the European criminology, and what would you wish for the European Society of Criminology in the future?
Oh, well, that's, it's very simple, saying, well, maybe just that it continues, that criminology has gets more importance in the relevant disciplines where it is established, in sociology, in psychology, and also in law. And that the networking improves even more, but I see, I'm, well, always positive thinking, and that's maybe different from many others, that I'm optimistic that it will continue and that we can play an important role also in law faculties and further develop criminology. But it is naturally difficult, and sociologists, there are some sociologists, they say that you cannot do good criminological research in law faculties. Okay, that's maybe a different opinion. But I wish that the disciplines come closer together, and that we succeed in establishing real empirical networks also. But yeah, again, we have good examples, we have good practices, we have good experiences. In particular here in Münster, the Department of Criminology is very well developed with Klaus Börs, and in particular also in this cooperation network with sociology and so on. And so it's, I always see the good practices and the good examples which can be leaders for further development of criminology. So, yeah, and I wish that I'm not the last president. The next one is already taking over in 2 days, and then, yeah, I'm optimistic that the European Society will further develop in a good way. And I wish it. Okay, so we should
Thank
maybe...
you very much, Frida.
Yeah.